Hey everyone, welcome to another recording session of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me this week to my right is Amanda Suffolcool of Eye on the Target Radio. Below her, John Richardson, Only Guns and Money. And below me is Rob Moore's Self-Defense Gun Stories. Of course, he's also got the Slow Facts blog. And he's above the water for an hour this week, so he decided he was going to join us. So, let's see here.
Great to be among friends.
Yeah. Let me make sure. I want to remind everybody as we get started, if you want to get your comment in, if you're watching on the Facebook page or the YouTube page for the Polite Society podcast, comment on those live videos, and we'll get your comments on the air. We'll discuss them as long as I've actually caught your comment while we're still discussing what you're discussing. That
was clear as mud.
Yeah, exactly. If we moved on to another topic and the comment I may or may not have seen, and at any rate, I try to be as quick as I can, but sometimes I'm just not quite quick enough on the uptake, my wife occasionally says. Don't you, sweetheart? Now I'm getting silence from her.
Don't fix this.
I'm sorry, what?
I was just explaining to everybody, sometimes I'm not quite as quick on the uptake as I should be, right?
Right. Sorry, I just had to find my glasses. The glare off your head earlier was a little blinding. Yeah. I'm glad you put your hat on.
You told me you didn't want your face on camera, so don't make me tempted to show you. So,
hey, go ahead and show me. I'm looking cool right about now.
All right, everybody. That is, well, it's not Amy Dillon. That's my beautiful wife Susan in her studio, and
which is like a disaster area at the moment. So take it off.
All right,
we're done.
Take it all off. I mean, it's
no.
All right. Let's go ahead and get started here. I do believe I'm
on
the fly.
I have people watching this show, and it has gone off the rail before it even started. Man, oh man, it's Shevitz.
All right, that's a crock of cheese. I shouldn't. We have important people watching this week, so I should try to behave a little bit at least. All right, is the rest of my team ready to fly?
Yes.
Right. There we go. All right. In that case, Massad Ayoob in 5, 4, 3.
Hey, gang. This is Massad Ayoob from the Pro Arms Podcast. I'm here to remind you that our podcast is a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. And I'm going to suggest you do what we do and check out the other podcasts at selfdefenseradio.net.
Treat every firearm as if it's loaded.
Never point a firearm at anything you're not willing to kill or destroy.
Keep your finger off the trigger until you are on target and ready to fire.
Always be sure of your target and what lies beyond it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast. We're recording this one on Monday, March the 13th, 2023. I'm Paul Lathrop.
I'm Rob Morse, and on tonight's show we talk about multiple credit card companies reversing their earlier decision to track our purchases made at firearms retailers.
I'm John Richardson, and we'll talk about an anti-rights organization claiming NSSFs work as their own.
I'm Amanda Suffolcool, and we're going to talk about an armed serial carjacker. Think about that, who eventually ran into the wrong armed victim. So climb aboard.
Strap in.
And hang on.
Episode 653 of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast starts right now. All right, it's Monday. It is 6 p.m. in the Central Time Zone, the only time zone that matters. That means it must be time for another episode of the Polite Society podcast. And as I usually do, Rob, I'm going to start off with you. What's been up with you? It's been, well, you weren't on last Monday, so it's been a few weeks. What's been up with you lately?
I was on Bill Frady's Lock and Load radio show. I recorded another episode of Self-Defense Gun Stories, and it just so happens my co-host was Amanda Suffolk. Thank you, Amanda. And I'm back from second vacations. John, you've been at conventions, but not the one I was attending. What have you been doing?
Well, I attended the Safari Club International Convention in Nashville the last week of February. Had a great time. Met a lot of interesting people, including podcaster Cable Smith of Lone Star Outdoor News. Talked to a lot of people. Worked the Grassroots North Carolina booth the first weekend of March and had an interesting encounter, which we'll talk about more in a bit. I booked our room for the NRA annual meeting in Indy. And finally, and most important of all, I was a guest on on the Target Radio last night with Amanda and Rob. So I'll pass it to Amanda.
Well, I just have to say that, Paul Lathrop, we scooped you with the John Richardson story because we covered it last night. But this week I have been playing politician, and so I have met the Ohio Republican Party chairman, who we've got a brand new one. I've met the Ohio Speaker of the House, who we've got a brand new one, and I've talked to a lot of politicians. But the good news is that Candy Petticord and I and a couple of the DC Project gals made a trip down to Columbus to testify on behalf of the Second Amendment Preservation Act, the SAPA bill, House Bill 51 for Ohio. And it looks very promising, and it looks like it's going to go through. It was pretty funny. The testimony is was about 3 minutes of my original official testimony, and 14 minutes of cross-examination, and had a Democrat state rep tell me that Bruen didn't mean what I thought Bruen meant, and that there are restrictions on it. And I'm like, respectfully, sir, no.
That's why we have judges, and from where I sit, you're a legislator, not a judge.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of that, so it's gonna be pretty interesting. But yeah, so Paul, how about you and Susan?
Well, we've been back, and I've been up to speed for a week. And this morning, I found out that some software updated, and every button that I pushed to make things happen on the screen now no longer worked. And so I spent about 6 hours today between the 3 shows that I video produced, the Bullet and Amanda show. I spent about 6 hours reprogramming all the buttons so they work correctly. And then about an hour to an hour and a half ago, my wonderful, loving sweetheart, when I asked if I should work on getting it so she can finally come back on the air again, making sure her microphone, everything works, she informed me that I really wasn't very good at reading the news. And so I should probably get that done so she could come back on the air. So that's
busy, in other words.
Yeah.
Can I concur without saying anything? Because, I don't want to read the news because I'll just be one eyeball over on the screen. And yeah, she's way better.
What you say is, good decision, Susan. Glad to have you back.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, she definitely is better at articulation than I am, especially these days. So let's go ahead and do this. We got news we got to get to, but I do want to tell everybody real quick about the Self-Defense Radio Network. Our tagline: all your pro-freedom podcasts in one place. As you can say, we're there. Eye on Target Radio, Riding Shotgun with Charlie, Self-Defense Gun Stories. In all, there are 15 shows on the network website right now, with more to come. You can listen to them right off the website, or their subscription information. If you find one you like, you can get the subscription information to get that show subscribed to so you can listen to it each and every time it's released. You can check that out at sdrn.us, and please do come check that out. What I think we're going to do right now, we're going to go ahead and step aside, and we're going to have our first break. We're going to hear from ACLDN. When we come back, we've got that news story we teased about multiple credit card companies saying, maybe we won't track everything you do at a gun store. We've got that and a whole lot of other stuff coming up right after this.
This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. If you carry a defensive handgun, you need protection from the aftermath of prosecution. Even if you do everything right, you can be the victim of an overzealous prosecutor or even be falsely accused. That is where the ACLDN comes in. They provide immediate assistance when you need it most. If you find yourself under arrest, they immediately pay bail money and the retainer for your attorney. Additional funds are available for trial and civil proceedings. Beyond the money, they have far and away the best team in the industry, providing you invaluable information and training DVDs that are included with your membership and who stand ready to work with your lawyer on your defense. People like Massad Ayub, John Farnham, James Fleming, Tom Gibbons, Emmanuel Capelson, Dennis Tuller, and led by Network President Marty Hayes. Initial membership is only $135 for your first year, and you get 8 incredible training DVDs and other educational material when you join. If you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to defend yourself at your disposal right now, you need to be a member of the ACLDN. Go to armedcitizensnetwork.org and become a member today. And please mention that you heard about them on the Polite Society podcast.
And welcome back. This is the news segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Susan, we got our first news story up about that credit card story. You want to go ahead and take that one?
A Visa spokesperson said that legislative efforts to prohibit or restrict the code have led to, quote, significant confusion and legal uncertainty in the payments ecosystem, unquote, adding that the state actions disrupt the intent of global standards. MasterCard said that if the bills being advanced in state legislators get passed, there would be inconsistency, which is why the company says it has put its plan on pause. A statement from Discovered confirmed the company will not implement the code in April as it had planned. The company said they made its decision to, quote, continue alignment and interoperability with the industry, end quote. And I said Paul was bad at this. American Express has also paused implementation of the code, according to multiple media reports. The new code was approved by the International Standards Body in September following pressure from gun control activists who say that it could help financial institutions flag suspicious debit and credit card purchases at certain types of stores. Amalgamated Bank, which is based in New York, led the push for the International Organization for Standardization to add the code. Priscilla Sims Brown, the bank's president and CEO, has argued the code would help the company comply with its, quote, duty to report suspicious activity and illegal gun sales to authorities without blocking or impeding legal gun sales, end quote. Gun rights activists and many Republican lawmakers and officials disagree, arguing that the code is an infringement on American Second Amendment rights.
All right. John, you're first up in show notes, man. What you got?
Well, first, I want to say one of the rationales for this code was it was supposed to stop mass shootings. I just don't see that happening. The bank itself, Amalgamated Bank, was founded years ago by labor unions in New York, but in more recent years, the majority owner is the Service Workers International Union, which tends to be one of the most left-leaning unions in the U.S. Frankly, I wonder how they're members like this, because a lot of union members are good, solid gun owners, even if their leaders are not. Rob?
Yeah, the bank is between a rock and a hard place, and they absolutely deserve to be there. The bank, based on some state regulations, the bank can get fined if they illegally track firearms owners. And this is where things get really complicated. See, we're just regulating transactions in our state. Well, is that where the Is that where the buyer lives? Where he's sitting at the time when he pushes the pay button? Or where the product is actually the origination of the shipment? Or where the transaction is processed financially? So the bank is sitting there, depending on whose lawyer gets a hold of this, they're saying, boy, this has to be absolutely uniform across the country, or they're going to owe a lot of money. And they can't take that risk. Paul, what do you think?
Well, and I want to point out the story said, and I believe this, the companies have said they're going to pause what they're doing. They did not say we're stopping doing this forever. We're pausing implementation was the phrasing. So we need to absolutely, I've already got a search in my news search surrounding this. So if it happens to come up again, they're going to have to use some really creative wording for me not to be able to know what's happening. And believe me, if I notice it, I will let everybody know. Amanda, what you got?
Well, there's a couple different things. One is in one of the articles that I did some research for my show last night was that it is an ISO standard. So the ISO did this new modification banking standard and implemented that. So that's the International Standards Organization. So which means that we've got the UN or the internationals telling us what we can and cannot track. So now they're tracking this. And so they're tracking everything that you buy at a sporting goods store is where. So if it's a gun store specifically, they're going to track that. They're not going to know, frankly, if we're buying a thermos, if we're buying a cooler, if we're buying a lawn chair, if we're buying an AR. They're not going to know that. But think about this. What else are they tracking? So do they do a report to your doctor or to your insurance company if you visit McDonald's, Burger King, or Quiznos? Where are these tracks and who are they reporting it to and who deserves to have your banking information of your trends and information? So I have been, as I said today, that I'm spending a lot of time talking to politicians this week. A piece of that has been, this is overreach in the state of Ohio, what you going to do about it? And I have pro-gun people who are interested in taking a stand on it, and I have firearms neutral people who are saying, hey, they're not tracking my McDonald's purchase. I don't want my wife to know, let alone my insurance company. So I think this is going to blow up in a way that they did not expect.
I want to get this comment in quick. What do they mean global? It was solely aimed at Americans. Well, as Amanda explained, this is a Swedish. Am I right there, Amanda? This is a Swedish standardization.
The international standards is the ISO people that bring us the ISO 9001, which is the quality standard for manufacturing on an international level. The ISO 14001, which is the environmental standard that they're invoking worldwide. So I'm not sure where exactly it's based, but I do know that it is not United States based.
I'm fairly certain of saying it is European based.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Sweden.
In Geneva.
Geneva. Switzerland, not Sweden. Okay.
Switzerland.
Okay. Rob, you're still up on show notes for this one.
Guys, choose your credit card companies wisely. Down here, y'all, in Louisiana, I don't have this problem about my credit card company tracking me, no how. But this is an opportunity for every state firearms organization. You know those stupid mailers we used to get from some three-letter firearms supporting organization that's happening to have huge legal problems right now? But yeah, like that. If they offered you a credit card and said, we won't track you, they can get a lot of gun owners in a hurry. This is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Bingo.
500 Magnum over on the YouTube side says, I don't have a credit card. Yeah, even if you have a debit card, it can still be tracked.
With a logo, yeah.
Yeah. All it's got to have is a Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, any of those logos, and it can be tracked. Susan, I really went off on this on Saturday on the weekend bullet, but why don't you go ahead and read this one, and getting set to go off again.
The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department has thousands of guns in its property room. Many of the guns have been connected to a crime. Some of them have not. The police department sends every single gun to the ballistics lab for testing. That data is sent to the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives for entry into a national database.
That story came off WISHTV.com. The backstory behind what brought this, I didn't want to put the whole big story up in there. A gentleman had his car towed. He parked it somewhere where it got towed. The Indianapolis PD went through his car, inventoried the car, took his firearm. They gave him his car back after he paid the towing and all that. Did not give him his car back. It took him 2 years to get his gun back after getting his car back. When he did get his gun back, oh, by the way, your gun has been fired, and all that information sent to the ATF. He was never accused of a crime, not even a misdemeanor. And so somebody, and the story also goes, this has been happening since the 1970s at the Indianapolis Police Department. There are several somebodies in the Indy PD that need to spend a nice long vacation at Club Fed. I'm talking 10 to 15 year prison sentences per person that is doing this. This is unconscionable that this is going on. There's a federal law, the 1986 Firearms Owners Protection Act, that forbids a national registry. So my blood. Next, Rob, I think you're up in here.
Do you guys remember, and it wasn't so many years ago, John, I'll defer to you for the date, when Maryland, who spent millions of dollars a year on a firearms database, yes, you'd like to register your firearm, you bring it to the police, we will fire it, have pictures of the groove marks on the spent bullet, we'll have the ejected casing to see if that leaves any marks. And then it turned out that they never solved a single crime with all that. It was a make-work project for the feds. So is this. And someone in the Indy city government, probably the mayor, is dialing for Bloomberg bucks. I'll bet you money on that, even odds. John, what do you think?
Well, going back to Maryland, I'm not sure when they started it, but if any of you remember when you bought a pistol, there was always this little brown envelope and it had a couple of fired casings in it.
Right.
And then a couple more were sent to Maryland. I think what eventually happened is Maryland just recycled all the brass. Part of me is like, yes, this is malfeasance on the part of Indianapolis. Part of me is just, this is bureaucratic inertia. This is the way we've always done it. They didn't think about it. We've always done it this way. What do you mean we're not supposed to do it?
Yeah.
Almost non-thinking, and nobody told them it was wrong somewhere along the way.
For 40 years, yeah. I concur, because this is that thing where they, there's all these stories about why somebody does something, and it was like, that was the way I was trained. There are so many people who get a job. It's sort of like when you give somebody directions, the first time they go wherever it is you gave them directions, they follow it exactly. If you tell them to go up 2 streets, turn right, go up 4 streets, turn right again, they'll do that instead of going up 3 streets and then turning, and then, that we all know that there's 20 different ways to get there, but they're going to go exactly the way you told them because they don't know where they could go wrong. That's how when somebody brand new in the government gets a job, they're going to do it exactly the way that they were told, because frankly there's a whole lot of, I don't want my name on something that says that I didn't do it the way I was supposed to. I didn't follow protocol. I didn't follow instructions. And we notice a lack of thinking associated with the critical thinking skills of why are we doing this? And why are we still adding Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid? But in a lot of cases, that's not where government training happens.
Well, there was a story a couple years back about, and it may have only been a year back, but it was a while ago, let's put it that way, of a Florida bureaucrat who never sent in the background check data they were supposed to send in because a password got lost.
For concealed carry licenses, they were supposed to be doing the background check and didn't for a period that was like a year and a half because the password didn't work anymore.
Yeah. Well, if they wouldn't make you change the thing every 6 weeks to one that hasn't ever been used by anybody ever before, maybe somebody could remember a password.
No, but I was talking to somebody who works for the government in a government entity, and it was just a random conversation that had nothing to do with this or the show, and it was that specific thing to where he's surprised by the people who don't take initiative, but they're so petrified, and they know that their boss does not have their back, and that they will be held up in effigy if something goes south. So they are going to make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted, given the way that they were trained. And so it could change years and years ago. And
Dana says, there you go, Amanda, back to ISO 9000.
You don't have to problem solve. You just have to do it the same way over and over. That's what 9001 says. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. It's official stupid.
Mm-hmm. Documented
stupid, right?
In triplicate.
Okay.
Susan, let's go ahead. Let's talk about Michigan.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer recently announced a new proposal aimed at improving gun safety in the state. Dubbed 14 Days to Save Lives, the initiative would require gun dealers to wait 14 days before completing a firearms sale. The idea behind the proposal is to give law enforcement time to complete background checks and identify any red flags associated with a potential gun purchaser. Currently, Michigan law requires only an instant background check before a gun sale can be completed.
This law is a mandatory waiting period. The law applies to everyone who wants to buy or transact a firearm, even if you already own guns. Think about that for a minute. The state's saying that we would only use a new gun to cause harm, but never the guns you already own, or the guns you could get from a family member or from a roommate. Okay, now remember that we defend ourselves thousands of times with a firearm for each time a criminal uses a firearm to commit murder. So we have to ask ourselves how many lives will be lost because the victim is disarmed by the state. John, what do you think?
I'm pretty cynical about this. And the whole march to gun control in Michigan, if it had been 3 people murdered in Detroit, I hate to say it, no one in government would have cared. It just would have been a normal day. However, since it was college students, we must do something. The thing is, if a prosecutor had done his or her job earlier when the guy had been charged with a felony, this actually might not have happened. He may not have been able to purchase his gun legally, even though he did not continue on and register it, which I understand is part of Michigan law. Paul?
I want to bring up, and this is a statistic I remember discussing with Rob, but average time to crime for firearms in the United States, and I do not remember the exact amount of time, but Rob, maybe your memory is better than mine, isn't it something like the average of somewhere between 7 and 12 years from the time a firearm is purchased to when it's actually used in a crime?
I remember the number 11. 11 years, yes.
Very, very well could be. So a 14-day waiting period is going to do zero to help what they think it's going to help with. You don't need a cooling off period if you're a normal law-abiding citizen. Where you need a cooling off period is if you're a gangbanger, who are not supposed to be getting them anyway.
Paul, guys, think through this. Do you think all this Michigan furor is A, dialing for Bloomberg bucks, probably, or is it the government trying to look effective when in fact they failed and were at fault and innocent people died because the government didn't prosecute this guy who did things that should have made him, by their own regulations, a prohibited person? What do you think?
Let's go to option number 3. Let's go to option number 3, though, which is that in Michigan, the Democrats just won the elections and have a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. And so this is their first opportunity. These bills were already written, and so this just pushed them ahead. And it's not just one, It's probably about 7 that are going barreling through the House and Senate because they are going to follow the Biden anti-gun agenda, and Michigan is going to take it and take it hard and fast here.
CNT Designs and Arms says time to crime last I looked was 5 to 11 years. And let me also get this one up. Dana says add red flag storage and additional gun-free zones. Those are additional laws that are up in Michigan.
Right.
Dana, by the way, is a Michigander. Is that what they're called? Michiganders? Michiganites? Whatever.
Michiganders.
Okay. And one more from CNT Designs and Arms. Most times they plea deal and the gun charges get dropped anyway. That is the absolute truth.
Right.
All right, we are at the bottom of the hour. Let's go. We're going to do one more news segment, but let's go ahead and we're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from the Complete Combatant. We've got more news, including Missouri law that we took a little bit of a loss on. We'll talk about that right after this. Hang on, everybody. Right back. This portion of the Polite Society podcast is brought to you by The Complete Combatant. The Complete Combatant is designed for a broad base of citizens that range from students that don't own a gun on up to advanced students that train often. The Complete Combatant offers several different courses that build upon each other, from avoidance, using verbal commands, and preparing for contact, lethal versus non-lethal decisions, your 911 call, interacting with the police, to even dealing with the legal system in the aftermath. The Complete Combatant courses are a layered approach for all levels of experience that will walk you through all the many stages of decisions while developing a game plan tailored to your skills and your everyday carry. Please visit www.thecompletecombatant.com and make sure you mention this ad to receive 15% off. Again, that's www.thecompletecombatant.com and mention the ad for 15% off. All right, welcome back. This is our second news segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. Susan, let's talk about Missouri.
A federal judge has struck down Missouri's Second Amendment Protection Act, finding the law to be an impermissible nullification attempt that violates the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution. SAPA's practical effects are counterintuitive to its stated purpose. U.S. District Judge Brian C. Weems wrote in a March 7th order, quote, while purporting to protect citizens, SAPA exposes citizens to greater harm by interfering with the federal government's ability to enforce lawfully enacted firearms regulations designed by Congress for the purpose of protecting citizens within the limits of the Constitution, end quote. Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey immediately said that he would appeal the ruling.
Yeah. This is called legislating from the bench, isn't it, John?
Pretty much. But that said, I can't say I'm really surprised. Any challenge to a federal law by a state, they're always going to try to pull out the supremacy clause. It just means that Missouri has to go back and retailor the law so they can work around it.
Actually, go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say the difference in Missouri's law to other laws is they made it just flat out a crime to enforce federal laws they thought would be unconstitutional. They didn't make it a crime for state employees. They didn't make it a crime for just the police, the state police or local police. They made it a crime flat out, period. I think that's where they ran into the supremacy clause. And unsurprisingly, this is an Obama judge that decided this, and it is, again, it's going to be appealed post haste.
So the congressman or state rep that put that bill together was in Ohio talking about the Ohio SAPA bill on Tuesday. And so if you want to see him in action, go to the Ohio channel and look for last Tuesday's testimony, or go to my Facebook page because it's on there. And he explains it because this decision came out Tuesday like at 11 o'clock, and we were talking about it at 1 o'clock. So it will indeed be appealed. And the state rep who put this bill forth does not believe that the judge is correct, and he delineated the reasons why. So Ohio is following exactly that same recipe, if you will. And the folks that I was talking to were saying that this is going to ratchet this up higher in the courts, which leads it to head to Clarence Thomas to be like another Bruin, don't make me talk to you about this again. And then when
don't you make me pull this car over.
Right, exactly. So it's going to be a case of that. But to me, this is another one of those where it ties the Bruin decision to the decision that came 2 days after, which was West Virginia versus the EPA, and the combination of those two bills are what this is going to be, which is right, because when the judge says that the Congress writes the laws and these organizations don't, that's exactly the point, though it's counter to kind of what he said it for. He said the right things for the wrong reasons in the wrong place, but okay.
Don't pay any attention to what's happening behind that curtain. Exactly.
John, do you want to comment on that? Because you're always the deep thinker on this.
Not really, because I haven't read the law, and I don't know enough about it to say one way or another.
Want to mention Roderick Converse has a comment up on Facebook that got into my software over here. It seems that federal firearms laws go against the supremacy clause in the Constitution. Well, there is something called the Second Amendment and shall not be infringed, and I believe you're right, Roderick. Yeah, so Susan, as much as it pains me, let's talk Maryland.
Maryland Senate gave preliminary approval Thursday to a bill that would prohibit a person from knowingly carrying a firearm at more public places or onto someone else's property without the property owner's express permission. The bill was amended to remove a proposed prohibition on carrying a firearm within 100 feet of a wide range of public spaces.
Again, this is another story we covered on Saturday on The Bullet, and that they did remove a provision that said 100 feet of public spaces. Now, instead of 100 feet, it's 50 feet. Maryland is trying to emulate New York and New Jersey because you have to have express permission from the property owner, not the renter of the property owner, to carry a firearm onto private property. Yeah. Rob, what do you think, man?
Well, well, maybe I'm being Pollyannish, but the federal district courts have already looked at this, and all the lower level federal courts have said, yeah, this doesn't pass the Bruin sniff test, at least in the Second and Third Circuits. John, what do you know about the Fourth Circuit?
I don't think it would pass muster in the Fourth Circuit. And the Fourth Circuit is just about ready to overturn an existing Maryland law which says that if you want to buy a handgun, you must go through a training class before you must be trained before you have the privilege of purchasing a handgun. Which I think is about the only state in the country that had that requirement. Just to buy a gun, you got to have training.
Training to purchase. Gotcha.
Training to
Oregon,
purchase.
the law's on hold, but that is the law in Oregon.
Yeah. Yeah, but this was from prior to somewhere in 2010, maybe a little earlier.
Okay. Any more on this one? It looks like we're good. Let's get some good news in. Susan, have you got any good news you can read?
Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota has reintroduced the Travelers Gun Rights Act, a bill aimed at expanding the rights of full-time travelers to own firearms. The bill seeks to update federal law to account for gun residency issues faced by individuals who live in recreational vehicles, RVs, people with multiple homes, and military personnel and their spouses. Currently, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives does not allow post office boxes or private mailboxes to be included on federal forms for firearms purchasers, which can create challenges for individuals with unique living situations. As a proponent of the Second Amendment, Rounds is committed to protecting the rights of lawful gun owners. He believes that the Travelers Gun Rights Act will eliminate an unfair prohibition that Americans with unique living situations face when trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. Rounds is not alone in his efforts, as Republican Representative Dusty Johnson, also of South Dakota, has introduced a companion bill in the GOP-controlled House.
I do believe this will pass the House. I believe it'll be a little tough, but it'll get past the House. I believe it'll get brought up in the Senate. And should a miracle happen and it make it through the Senate, it's going to have to be part of an omnibus bill, something like the National Defense Authorization Act. It's going to have to be part of that for it to get through Biden. He will never, ever, 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 ever sign it. And I don't want to just say RVers. Yeah, RVers are one large group of people that this applies to. What about people that maybe own a boat? They live on the Gulf Coast. They are on the boat a great deal of the time. They may or may not live in their house 6 weeks a year. You know, there's Rob. You're up next in show notes. What do you think, man?
Well, it's a fair number of people, Paul, and it would apply to you, a truck driver. You know a lot of guys who basically have a mailbox and a truck. They're from my industry, contract engineering and services workers. You know, I know guys that go from plant to plant to plant. Again, they've got a mailbox and an RV. Military members, they may not really be, quote, home for years at a time. So it's obscene that their rights are violated because they're not paying rent to a place where they're never home. Amanda, what do you think?
I'm going to say voter registration. So when you look at this is exactly the same issue that voter registration is facing. So when they do this bill, if they tied it to voter registration, because there is a law that says that they cannot use like a UPS PO box to register for voting. And there's a lot of manipulations so that some Americans, the nomadic Americans, may or may not be able to vote because they can't register for voting. So this bill is going to have the tail of the dragon that goes right along with it. John, what about you? What do you think?
Following up on what you said, I wonder if they would pass it so that the great homeless population, who can't just say, my address is the corner of Main and 2nd Street, at least for this night, would they do it? Because potentially they could be a big Democratic constituency. I wonder if you could say a vote slip could count as a street address. I mean, 123 Harbor Street, slip 22, or whatever. I mean, it is a physical location. I don't know.
I will say this, speaking as a former trucker of 20 years, there are a lot, and I mean a whole lot, for voting purposes, of drivers who use the shop that they're stationed at as their home address. They'll list their address as, 1825 Burnside Street, and then their boss just, any mail that comes, they just hold the mail for 6 weeks later when they get into the shop.
Right. Homeless people use the homeless shelter addresses. In a lot of cases, I've heard this rumor that since they're not allowed to use a UPS store, they use the mall across the street from it. Right? So it's the letter of the law versus the intent of the law. So there's things with this that I think will get deeper. And if we, as firearms people, are smart about things, we look at the corollaries and we force those into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But for years, you could say, oh, I'm traveling through, send mail, care of postmaster, and I will go to the post office and pick it up. We've solved this before.
They don't hold them for very long.
Okay.
So saying a person who has a address in Florida that does not have a mailbox, and
let me get this one in there, and I think this will engender some conversation here. If you're not a productive member of society, I don't want you voting. Part of me says that's valid. Part of me that says we all should be able to vote.
How do you count truck drivers as productive members of society? So is it the homeless that you're talking about, or the truck drivers, or both? Right?
Or the retired people who are chasing the weather north and south and don't have a permanent address anymore. Tell me why they need one.
Well, and I brought this up Saturday. There are a large number. South Dakota is not just because of this bill. I live in South Dakota. I love South Dakota, except for the weather this time of year. But there are a large number of RV parks here that will allow you to use, for tax purposes, to use their address as your registered address for taxes and vote. Taxes, we do not have a state income tax, period. The property taxes here are reasonable. There's a lot of people who are in RVs that call South Dakota home simply for the tax benefits, and the more the merrier. Come on. Anyway,
come see us in late August and get your mail.
Yes.
Once a year.
Yes, and they charge that. Do not get me wrong. They charge for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to me, I just don't think we need to disenfranchise people because junk mail needs a home.
Yeah, and you know what? That's everything I get that's business or work related. Everything I get comes through email. I don't get anything other than bills that are ancient, meaning I've had these bills forever and have not got them converted to email yet, and junk mail through the U.S. Postal Service. And every once in a while, because I cannot convince them not to, I'll get an Amazon delivery. And then it's got about a 30% chance of ending up at somebody else's house, and I'll never see it anyway. So...
Right.
CNT says,
Yeah.
I love drivers. My dad was one for years. They should be able to vote by mail. Most drivers vote absentee. You pick a time within 6 weeks of the election, you get a run through home, you go vote. That's what I did. Susan, I gotta have you make my blood boil again. Let's do this ATF story.
On March 9th, 2023, President Biden put forward his budget proposal for fiscal year 2024, which includes over, how many zeros is that?
It's 1.9
$1,900,000,000 million for the
Yes.
Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. Wow. That's a 13.6 increase over the 2023 budget. ATF's budget to enforce unconstitutional gun laws was only $1,258,600,000 in fiscal year 2017 when President Trump took office, and $1,400,000,000 in 2020 before President Biden took office. This means that if Congress passes this budget, the ATF would have grown 35.7% larger during the Biden presidency and 50.9% larger since the Obama administration. These funds and an expanded ATF will be used to continue President Biden's war against American gun owners and the firearms industry.
I brought up an idea on Saturday. It will never, ever, ever, ever happen. When you file your income taxes, there ought to be a list at the bottom of the alphabet agencies of the federal government. And you rank where you want your tax money to go. National Park Service, they'd be fully funded for eternity. NASA would get a bigger budget. The military, I'm sure, would be funded very, 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 very well. We could say goodbye to the IRS. We could say goodbye to the ATF. We could say goodbye to a myriad of, but it'll never, ever, ever happen because the people in Washington, D.C. know better than you do what your money is good for. That's why it'll never happen.
Yes.
Don't trip getting up and off this soapbox. It's an occupational hazard in our line of work.
All right, last story, Susan. Let's talk finally about a little bit of good news. Or did she get up to take the dogs out? I think she may have done that.
John, you want to read this?
Okay. Only one gun bill goes to the governor of Virginia this year, and it doesn't suck. Virginia lawmakers agree they want to reduce gun violence. They mean the criminal misuse of a firearm, despite a divergence in schools of thought about how to get it done. Legislators reviewed a limited number of gun-related bills during this year's legislative session, and most of them succumbed to a partisan gridlock. Virginia's Democrat-controlled Senate passed several bills that later were defeated in the Republican-controlled House of Delegates. A number of House measures, conversely, failed in Senate committees that Democrats led. The House did send over an NRA-backed bill aimed at gun safety. It cleared the Senate and is soon to be reviewed by Governor Glenn Youngkin. Carried by Delegate Alfonso Lopez, Democrat of Arlington, HB 2387 would allow an up to $300 tax credit when someone purchases one or more firearm safety devices. That would include safes, gun cases, or lockboxes. Lopez explained that he had been in communication with the NRA ahead of this session to see if they could get to yes on supporting this bill.
I think it's a model for other states.
Mm-hmm.
My concern is this. They've got a list of approved safes that this will apply to. They've got a list of approved locks this will apply to. They've got a set of approved this and that and the other that this will apply to. What's to say 3 years down the road they go from now you must use this, that, or the other safe, this, that, or the other lock. You know, that's my concern.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I mean, if we're going to give you a tax credit, then they'll turn around and say, we're giving you the tax credit, so therefore you must engage in safe storage.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't typically do that. I mean, I see your point, but they don't typically. It's you check the box, you do the stuff, you get your tax refund, and you move forward. No, I think it's actually a pretty good move. I mean, anything that would encourage people to have lock boxes, because a $300 credit would buy a fingerprint safe, you know, a lock box, a multi-gun, like one of the stack-ons, or not to name brands, but you know, that kind of a non-fireproof gun security cabinet of some sort. So in a lot of households, that could be the difference between having one and not having one. And I think that every one of us could get behind that. And so think about it. If we could get another lockbox every year for a $300 credit, woohoo! Look at
Or another training class for a $300 credit. Like, I need more of a incentive to take more training.
Wouldn't that be? That would be another pro gun to take a safety training class and get a credit. That would be another very good bill. So, yeah.
I think we've had a bill very similar to this. I think introduced by a Democrat in North Carolina, except they're giving $500 tax credit, which I want about like $3,000, get a brand new big safe. But the fat boy,
right? It's like, can I
prorate it to the house? That's a safe in and of itself.
I want the door. Can I prorate it for 6 years till I get what I want? Right?
Makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Have a carryover part of it.
Right.
That's going to do it for the news segment. Let's go ahead and take our next break. When we come back, we've got 3 DGUs to talk about. And you get to hear from my beautiful wife, Susan, again, who's back from letting the dogs out. So we're going to step aside to break. And when we come back, we'll have those DGUs right after we hear from JPFO.
It all failed before. Alcohol prohibition brought us organized crime, and no less alcohol. Drug prohibition brought us murderous, no-knock, wrong house raids.
Police! Search warrant!
No, wait! The crack house is next door!
Now gun prohibitionists want laws to lead us down that same path. Don't Americans ever learn? Just ask yourself, isn't government the only beneficiary of police-state policies? Brought to you by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. Information available at jpfo.org.
And welcome back to the Defensive Gun Use segment of the Polite Society podcast presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. These discussions are not legal advice. Some of us are trainers, but this is not formal training, and you need formal training. The Defensive Gun Use segment is intended as information, not as training. As always, the opinions of the hosts are only their own opinions and not those of any sponsors or other affiliations. Susan, let's go ahead and go to Ohio.
A serial carjacker wreaked havoc on Morrow County on a Sunday afternoon and evening. The 25-year-old suspect attempted to steal a car on the northbound off-ramp of Ohio 61 and I-71. When the driver denied him the use of the car, the suspect fired several shots at the car. The carjacker then went to a Shell station and attempted to steal a minivan from Megan Stanford of Greenville, South Carolina, while she pumped gas. The attacker shot and struck Stanford. She died at the scene. The suspect then fired at a U-Haul van driven by an unnamed male. The difference was that this van driver shot back. The suspect died at the scenes from his wounds. Marengo, Ohio is halfway between Mansfield and Columbus along Interstate 71. According to Columbus police, from 6:12 to 6:47 p.m., A series of criminal offenses occurred which would have been attributed to this deceased suspect. Excuse me. 6:28, he fired rounds into an unoccupied Chevy, which was locked but running while the owner was in a gas station. He left his car, a Toyota, behind and fled in the stolen Chevy. At 6:36, the stolen Chevy had been abandoned. 911 called, reported shots fired during an attempted robbery/home invasion. The suspect stole a white BMW X3. 6:47, the suspect attempted to rob a food delivery driver. Shots were fired, but no one was injured. The BMW was recovered at the scene. He then headed north on Interstate 71.
Busy boy. I gotta say, I was not reading that so much as listening to it. And when Susan read he stole a BMX, I'm picturing in my head a 25-year-old on a little dirt bike pedaling down the interstate, and that just didn't quite work so well for me.
Sorry, but it might have been more interesting than the BMW.
It did at that. BMWs are a little quicker. It's unfortunate that a lady died, but I'm glad the suspect can no longer harm anybody else. John, looks like you're writing in show notes, man. Nope, and you're muted.
You're right, I am muted. Sorry.
That's all right.
Two things that come to mind. Pants on, gun on. And when you're at a gas station, you need to keep your head on a swivel. If you get mesmerized by the cost of, the gas pump just going up and up and up, not as bad as it once was, but you need to keep a 360-degree field of awareness, because people can sneak up on you all too easily.
There is that. Did you see the video of the carjacking or proposed carjacking where they used the gasoline from the gas pump to stop them? So I'm thinking that you could keep your head on a swivel, you got your gas pump and a lighter, right? You're good.
Yeah. And she I remember that, just soaked the guy.
Right, yeah, it was smart. It was smart.
And
Use
a
the tools
Zippo
you've got.
lighter, because you can toss those things and they stay lit.
Go.
All right. Yeah, and going back to that one, man, I have seen that video, and once the bad guy standing outside the van that was trying to do the robbing got soaked, he was done. He was I'm no longer want any of this. And it seemed there was no sound of that video. It seemed like maybe somebody else in the van thought that they maybe had some extra beans in their meal before they went and were maybe ready to do some tangling until he took the gas nozzle, shot it inside the driver's window.
In the van.
Then the driver decided, look, I'm not having any more of this, and he's gone.
Yeah. I think all of us have a healthy respect for gasoline and being flooded with gasoline and the overall dangers of it. So it too is a impromptu self-defense tool. And yeah.
I certainly don't want to be flambéed myself. So yeah, Susan, let's go ahead and go to Portland. They don't allow guns there. How's yours at DGU?
Portland, Oregon, that city of law and order. A Portland business owner stopped an individual attempting to break into a business. During the break-in attempt, the suspect and the business owner got into a confrontation. Shots were fired. The owner was not injured, but police found the suspect suffering from wounds at the scene. The owner stayed and was cooperating with police. The leftist legislators and progressive voters in the state are attempting to make stories like this null and void. Measure 114 would make standard magazines illegal and make purchasing a firearm difficult. Like it's not already difficult? As John Lott has stated about the impact of these laws, while testifying against a gun ban in Oregon's neighboring state of California, Lott wrote that, quote, that there is no credible evidence that such laws have any meaningful effect of reducing gun homicides and no discernible crime reduction impact, end quote. After a brief bench trial, the judge reached his decision in June 2021. He overturned California's ban and quoted Lott's assessment verbatim, as reported by the New Yorker in 2022.
I've been in debates with guys who are getting paid by Bloomberg. And I point out, look, I'll show you the crime rate. You can't tell me which states do or don't have gun control based on their crime rate. And their comment is, well, but it might help. Except often we find out that gun control doesn't help because it disarms the victims. And of all the things that criminals want to know, they're praying that we'll hand them disarmed victims. 1 out of a dozen of us, in fact, I just reran the numbers. It's a little higher than that now. More than 1 in a dozen of us are going armed in public. Those are ugly odds if you're going to go commit a violent crime. On the other hand, here are laws that say, look, we don't want people to drink and drive and have a gun. Well, how about you're also disarming the designated driver if you say no firearms in places that serve alcohol? You put all of those people on a platter to be the victims of crime. And that's in fact what we see.
Amen. Amen. Susan, let's go do this last one in the Villages.
A man arrived at an Applebee's in the Villages, Florida, just before 1 a.m. The restaurant was closed at the time. He got into an altercation outside the restaurant, and at least 3 shots were fired. Employees locked the doors and called 911 when the man tried to enter through the front door. Although no explanation was given, a woman inside the restaurant opened a side door and let the man in. Another altercation took place inside the building. A patron with a concealed weapon permit was also inside and shot the man, who died at the scene. Other details, such as whether the patron who ended the incident was the same man involved earlier or not, but it does seem as they were not originally involved in the altercation inside the establishment.
After looking this one over, I have to wonder if maybe this wasn't an inside job because somebody let this guy in after shots were fired.
Yeah.
And why? We don't have a lot to go on this one, period.
Right.
But somebody with a concealed carry permit and was carrying is inside the business. I would certainly hope he wasn't part of the altercation to start with on the outside and then came inside, and then somebody else decided that no, indeed, this wasn't over. We're going to let the bad guy in too. I don't know. And John, you're muted again.
John is so thoughtful. He takes a lot of time considering each comment. It's a carefully crafted masterpiece, isn't it, John?
Still muted, bud.
John.
We're going to report out that John got a brand new headset for some holiday here, and
I thought I was the only one who had problems like that.
He's still struggling with that. Yet, John? No, maybe.
Now it looks like he's frozen.
No, he's not. So the interesting thing to me is Applebee's has a bar. So I think that, you said, is it an inside job? And I'm thinking, was the person who opened the side door just drunk? So if you're in one side of the restaurant, they're over on the other side, something's happening up front, you're not paying attention, you and your friends are watching a sporting event, and there's some dude at the side door that's asking to be let in. I think it's... And the Villages the average age of the folks at the Villages is somewhere around 127 years old.
128.5, I think. But yeah.
There you go. So I'm just saying that all of those things mean that it may not necessarily be what you think it is. John, are you good to go yet? Now he's changing colors. Nope.
Not yet, bud. Right.
So for those of you who are only doing this via podcast, John has started to make adjustments to the point where all of his lights went pink, and then they went blue, and then so he's very festive going on there in his little muted stage.
All right, let's do this. I think, John, we're just going to lose your commentary. I'm sorry. Keep working on it, because I do want to. We've got our blog segment next, and I do want to talk to you about what you found in North Carolina and what you wrote about it. So we do still have that coming up yet. So
John,
should you log
sometimes
again?
I had to leave the podcast and re-enter.
Yeah.
And
we'll go to a commercial.
Yeah, let's do that. We'll come back. If not, if we cannot get John back, we'll badly summarize what he did.
We could do bad lip reading. He could do things. We would do bad lip reading, and we could help him.
All right.
I don't think he wants that.
Let's hear from JPFO again. We'll be right back for our final segment right after this.
In 1928, Germany required its citizens to register their firearms, making possible Hitler's 1938 Nazi Weapons Act, disarming all Jews. Now ask yourself, what is the real consequence of registration? All in favor of gun control, raise your right hand. Brought to you by Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership, America's aggressive civil rights organization. jpfo.org.
Welcome back to the final segment of the Polite Society podcast, presented by the Second Amendment Foundation. I haven't screwed up like that in forever. It's been at least a month. Anyway, this is the point where we talk about what we've been doing in media and what's coming up of what we're doing in media. Rob, as always, I'm going to start with you, man. What's been going on?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, I was on vacation, but after I left last time, I wrote before I left. So ignorance and ignoring evil will get us killed. That's not abstract. That's something we faced every single day. And here's why. The listeners to this podcast understand something that our neighbors ignore. When it comes to violence, we're completely uninterested in limiting the behavior of honest and law-abiding citizens. They're not the ones that are committing crimes. We want to change the behavior of criminals and violent attackers. Ask yourself how a criminal thinks and how he acts, and he really does not care about gun control. Yeah, we have to explain that to our neighbors because they don't get it. They think differently. There is an intellectual divide between firearm supporters and the people who support gun control. My articles are up at Clash Daily, at AmmoLand, and at my blog, slowfacts.wordpress.com. Shall I ask John to speak, or is he still struggling? No, he's not.
He's frozen.
No.
Amanda,
who's going to speak for John
you scooped
today?
us yesterday. Do you want to talk about scooping us?
Yeah, I will talk for John. Poor John. So this is John gets points for his powers of observation, and so he was at the gun show in Asheville. So the Asheville Gun Show, and so a couple different groups of people walked up to him and were asking him pointed gun buying questions, and then as it got into him and he sort of figured some stuff out, they were from a group called Be Smart for Kids, and that group was a firearm safety group. So John went over to talk to them after he got done setting up, and while he was over there talking to them, he realized that they had private labeled their Be Smart for Kids their information on top of Project ChildSafe's gun locks. You know, the gun locks that say that they're not for distribution by any unauthorized groups. You know, so John's back. Okay, I just got to the spot where you got to their booth and you saw their that they had usurped the Project ChildSafe's gun locks. So go from there.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Too loud, but yeah.
You're a little loud.
Well, we'll do.
Turn it down a little.
Bud. Just go with it.
Okay, so I got to their booth, and I'm chatting with them. Where did you get your gun locks? Oh, we got them from this sheriff's department, and I took a picture of it. Well, I saw Project ChildSafe on it, and I also saw the label that said, "Not for distribution by unauthorized groups." Well, I had known that Moms Demand Action and Everytown had scammed Project ChildSafe locks in the past and gotten called out on it. So I took a picture of it. Later that morning, I posted it on Twitter and said, you know, you have the Bloomberg supported group Be Smart at the Asheville Gun Show. The locks that they're giving out were paid for by NSSF. You would think that with Bloomberg's billions that they could buy their own, and I call them cheap whatevers. That went viral. On the 8th, NSSF on their website posted a whole story about it, quoting my tweet, which then got picked up by Bearing Arms, which got picked up by Guns and Gadgets Daily, which got picked up by AmmoLand Today, which got picked up by T-Tag. I mean, basically what the group did is they went to the gun show promoter and said, we're a local group dealing with kids' safety. And he said, okay, I like kids, I believe in kids' safety. And he gave them a free booth. They went to the sheriff's department and said, we're working on kids' safety. They didn't say, we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Bloomberg's Everytown. And so then yesterday, I'm just cruising, or actually before going on with Amanda, I did a quick Google search, and who is really praising them and putting pictures out about them? Moms Demand Action. Are not Be Smart volunteers, but our volunteers.
Gotcha.
And Holly Sullivan, who was with the DC Project and Connecticut Civilian Defense League, sent me a picture last week of the box they hand out Project ChildSafe. They're an authorized group. But she always had wondered why on the box it said, not for or Everytown and Moms Demand Action are unauthorized groups. And she wondered about that. Now we know why. I mean, just think how much safety or training could be paid for if we just had the budget of Everytown for 1 year and put it with Eddie Eagle, Project ChildSafe, Derek LeBlanc's Kids Safe Foundation, something that actually does something about safety, who doesn't say, ask about the presence of unsecured guns in other homes. Now this is also, okay, now we're talking about Be Smart for Kids. Why are they talking about suicide? Recognize the role of guns in suicide. Tell your peers to be smart. And the two leaders of the group turned out to be ex-school teachers from outside Chicago. It is what it is. But you can see more about it and other pictures at onlygunsandmoney.com.
Well, and I'm going to say, John, good detective work on this, because you put up pictures on your blog, and you've really, 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 really got to blow those things up to see a blur of where Everytown appears on that paperwork.
Mm-hmm. It's at the very bottom line.
Raise
You
it up a
can't
little.
even
Yeah.
read it. I mean, to read it, you can't see it because it's gray. 6-point type. Or maybe 4-point. They don't want it. They want Bloomberg's money, but they don't want you to know that they're getting Bloomberg's money.
Right. Well, see, I thought your tweet went viral just because you called them a word.
Cheap, illegitimate children.
Right, that word.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Which they are. All right. On my part, I want to encourage everybody, do come join me the rest of this week, 5 p.m. Central Time, for the Bullet. We did not do one today. The person that was supposed to be joining me, Tom Knighton, was getting under the weather, lost his voice, and I couldn't find it for him. And so we just decided, I just arbitrarily decided, look, I'm already doing a broadcast today. We'll just do Polite Society. That's why there was no Bullet today. But do come join me 5 p.m. Central Time the rest of the week. We'll talk about breaking news of that day for the Bullet. That does wrap up another episode of the Second Amendment Foundation's Polite Society podcast. So for Amy, Dana, John, Susan, Amanda, Charlie, Robin, Carrie Ann, and Rob.
Until next time.
Stay safe.
And be aware.
And we'll see you down the road.
The views and opinions on the show you just heard are those of the host and the guest and are not necessarily the views of any sponsors or other affiliations. But hey, not everyone is as smart as we are.
All right, we are clear of recording. Before I shut the stream down, as I was jamming out to our outro music, and we've had the same outro music for more than 10 years, and it's not going to change because, frankly, I paid a lot of money for it, and I'm not going to pay a lot more money for another song. But I have and Susan can attest to this, I have a rather annoying habit of I'll be scrolling through Facebook and catch a short video of cats or dogs or something silly, and I'll hand it to her. You've got to see this. Well, one I haven't handed her yet, I've discovered a guy on Facebook called Buckets the Drummer. He sits in his bathtub with a bucket and drumsticks, and he has a horse head on, and it's a big costume horse head over, and he does silly renditions of classic rock songs. And while I was running, I'm going, I wonder if Buckets would cover our intro music. So I sincerely doubt it because it's not widely enough known, but that is going to do it. We're going to shut the stream down. Please do come join us next week. And thanks, everybody, for watching.